Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you happen to be around the world, as you are logging into this live iThemes training live stream here talking about WordPress 6.3. It is the WordPress 6.3 launch party. My name is Nathan Ingram. I am the host here at iThemes Training, and I'm joined today by Timothy Jacobs. Timothy is the lead developer for Solid WP. That is the company that iThemes is becoming. That is in process, and if you are following along with the rebrand in public, do so at solidwp.com. But Timothy is here with us, lead developer for Solid. He's also a WordPress core committer and a maintainer of the WordPress REST API. He also co-organizes the WP New York City Help Desk. Welcome back to iThemes Training, Timothy. Glad you're here.
Glad to be here, Nathan.
So we've been doing these launch events for the last several versions of WordPress, and there's always something fun to see. And you're, of course, very connected with WordPress core, and you're following all these changes as they're happening. If you had to just summarize in, like a big headline version, what is WordPress 6.3 about?
So I'd say there's two things. Like a lot of our past releases, the site editor, and the site editor. WordPress stabilized. We kind of removed the beta tag from the site editor in the previous release. But this one that did not signify the end of development by any means. This has done a lot of buttoning up to make, I think, the site editor experience a lot more coherent, a lot more cogent, and a place where I'm more comfortable saying, hey, this is probably where you should be starting. It's a great entry point into WordPress. The other side is, though, the performance team. We talked about this when it started up, I think last December or so. And they've been doing a great job over the past few WordPress releases, and this one is no exception. There have been a lot of updates, really just focused on how do we make WordPress faster. The performance team shared, and I'm just pulling up these numbers, I think, that, WordPress 6.3 for block themes is 27% faster in WordPress 6.3 than it was in 6.2. And for classic themes, even, it was 18% faster. So the performance team is continuing to make improvements on making WordPress even more of the best choice for your CMS. But I would say kind of the standout news there is that you get a lot of great performance with the block editor, and that using those themes has some advantages as well, beyond just the aesthetics.
Yeah, for sure. The speed difference is that may be one of the first things that folks who might not have quite made the transition to use the site editor fully, certainly it's very likely you'll see some speed improvements, which is very cool. Another bit of a landmark here for WordPress 6.3 is that it's ending phase 2 of Project Gutenberg, which was taking the block editor, which was created in phase 1, and moving that into the other areas of the site, like the headers, footers, sidebars, in the site editor feature. And now we're moving into phase 3 of Gutenberg, which is all about collaboration. We talked a lot about that in last month's news roundup. Any insight on that coming up, Timothy?
Not yet. I will say over the past month or so, Matthias and other members of the WordPress core team have been publishing great posts over on make.wordpress.org that kind of give high-level feature summaries of what we want to see out of phase 3 Gutenberg and phase 3 of WordPress. And so development, like in this release, we removed the beta tag in 6.2, I believe. And we did continue to see updates here. We're going to continue to see updates to the block editor, the site editor, navigation, things like that over the next few releases. But the next big meaty piece that the core team, the Gutenberg teams are biting off is collaboration. And so, you can check those out over on make.wordpress.org.
Yeah, there's some really, really interesting features that are going to be coming to WordPress core in this next phase of Project Gutenberg. All right, so today we're totally focused on WordPress 6.3, and Timothy's going to walk us through these new features and demo those live. You also have the opportunity to ask questions, and I invite you to do that. Just mouse over the Zoom shared screen, and you'll see a Q&A icon there. Click that. It'll pop open a Q&A box, and I would just suggest that you leave that open throughout. If you have a question to ask, drop it in there. We'll have a good time of Q&A at the end, but also keep that open because you'll also have the opportunity to upvote the questions of others, and we'll be taking those questions in the order of upvotes when we get to the Q&A time at the end of the live stream today. So once again, this is being recorded, and if you'd like to view the replay, I just dropped the link bundle again in the chat. we'll have the replay up about 30 minutes or an hour after we wrap up today, as soon as Zoom decides to render the video. We'll get that up and ready for you. All right, so with that, I'm going to disappear, turn it over to Timothy. Let's talk WordPress 6.3.
Awesome. Let's do it. So one thing that I want to call out is you might not see this page. Your host might update WordPress for you, but it is lovingly designed each WordPress release. That is, if you hop up into the little W menu in your toolbar and you go on over to About WordPress, you'll get this nice little overview post. A new thing is this Get Involved tab. So this gives you a couple of different starting points for how you can get involved in WordPress. And if you hop on over to this Find Your Team link, you'll actually kind of like get this little quiz that's been built to see, hey, what's the place that I can contribute to the future of the web? So this is an awesome page in every WordPress release, but this Get Involved tab I wanted to especially highlight if you're wondering how you can get involved with WordPress. This is a great place to find out. Before we, as I mentioned, dive into the site editor stuff, I did want to give a little bit of overview on some of the more technical sides that we can get that out of the way. So like I mentioned, the performance team has been hard at work. This WordPress 6.3 field guide provides an overview of a lot of stuff, but in particular, it talks about some of the improvements that they've made to the caches API to get user queries cached, which will greatly speed things up on sites with large numbers of users. Term, comments, and site metadata is now lazy loaded. We actually now have built-in support for async and deferred scripts. So you might see previously there was some kind of like hacky ways that you can mark a script as async and deferred. But if you're a theme developer or plugin developer, or you're adding in some extra stuff for your clients with a little bit of code, pay attention to these changes. It can do wonders for speeding up your site. If a script doesn't need to be loaded when the page is loaded, this is an easy way that you can mark that to be the case. There have been some changes as well to the updater to improve stability, again, on different hosting environments. So another big win there. And we didn't mention this in the, hey, what's the couple word overview? But WordPress has finally dropped support for PHP 5. So these days, I would say you should be on PHP 8.1. But we have finally dropped support for PHP 5.6. So if somehow you are still on a PHP 5.6 site, you are now going to need to update your PHP version to stay up to date with WordPress. But I hope none of y'all are. You should be on 8.1, maybe even 8.2. Okay, so let's get ready to dive into some of these Gutenberg changes. So the Gutenberg changes are accompanying in this update changes from Gutenberg 15.2 all the way to 16.1. I think there's like more than 1,000 different Gutenberg changes that have been introduced in this update, and we're not going to be able to touch on all of them, but we're going to start with the site editor. So under Appearance Editor, you'll see that this is a little bit similar to what we had before, but we have this radically new designed sidebar area. And it is a really great spot for navigating around the site editor and bringing a lot of features that might have been a little bit more buried into the prominence that they deserve. So I'm going to start with the styles section. So a very cool thing here is that I can update the style of my WordPress site just from this sidebar area. So this is a convenient way of seeing all the different style variations that come with my theme. This is kind of like WordPress's new and modern take on child themes. So previously we would have, 2018 and there's 55 different child themes of it. Theme developers can now kind of bundle their own different style variations, which we've had since the introduction of theme.json. But we are now able to see a preview of this over in the sidebar. So we don't even have to dive into the site editor to make those changes. But there are more changes over here as well. You'll see there's navigation, pages, templates, and patterns. I'm going to dive into patterns for a second. So a big change that has happened in this update is a naming change. And that is previously we had this feature, I think introduced all the way back in, it might have been with the initial release, maybe 5.1 if it wasn't, which are reusable blocks. And so reusable blocks are a great technique in WordPress to be able to take a set of content that you want to reuse in multiple places on your site and have it shared between all these places. So you don't need to make changes every single time you make a change to any of that content. This feature now still exists, but it has been renamed to patterns. Additionally, what changes is that we now have the concept of synced and unsynced patterns. So in this patterns section, I can see my patterns, which right now I don't have any, but we'll go ahead and create some. We have the feature patterns from my theme, from posts patterns, some different footer options, and as well as the different template parts. But what's cool is we now have this new plus button. So I can create my own pattern. And I can create both a synced pattern and an unsynced pattern. By default, it's going to be an unsynced pattern. So what that means is, let's say I have a design layout that I like to use a lot. Let's say like a 2-up image pattern. I can go ahead and create that. And I'm going to keep this unchecked for now. Keep all pattern instances in sync. I won't check that. I'm going to hit create. WordPress is going to drop me into an editor for this specific pattern. And now I can do things like create a starting point for users to use on my site. So let's say we'll insert a group block. We'll make this 2 columns, and maybe we'll select an image over here and another image on this side. Whoop. So here's an example. We have like 2 images up side by side. Maybe we want to add additional information to that. We could wrap this in a column and maybe put some text after this row, something like that. We'll say, here are a pair of images. And maybe we'll italicize that, put it in the center, something like that. Maybe select a smaller font size, and we'll go ahead and save that pattern. So now if I go back, I can see we have this 2-up image pattern here, and it's displayed in the list. And so now I can use this pattern anywhere in my site. So if I go back to my WordPress dashboard, create a new page, let's say our iThemes training post, and I want to insert this pattern, I can now go ahead into add patterns, my patterns, and we'll find our 2-up image. And so now this is an unsynced pattern, which means any changes I make here won't be persisted to the actual pattern that I created earlier. So this is a really helpful tool for like using as a starting point. So maybe for this particular page, I want to replace this image to be a different one, maybe this one, and I want to replace this image to be, let's say this one. I think we just reversed those. And we'll say, here are my cool images. And now I'm using this pattern on this page. And so previously, these patterns would need to be things that your theme author provided or were created on WordPress.org. But now you have a place to do it in WordPress itself. So what about those synced patterns? So yes, those sync patterns too are like reusable blocks. They are reusable blocks. They've just kind of been renamed. So when we go into patterns, we're going to go ahead and click add new again, and we'll create a pattern. And let's say we'll call this our about me content. And now I'm going to check this keep all pattern instances in sync. And so what this means is when I edit the original pattern, it will also be updated anywhere I use this pattern. So I can go ahead and create this. Maybe we'll make this a group block. And we'll put in an image. And we'll say, I don't know, we'll pretend this is a headshot of me. We'll put it followed by some text. Have a heading about Tim, and then we'll have some text. This is some text about me for my website. And we'll go ahead and take this group block. And we'll align everything into the center like that. And we'll go ahead and hit save. And so now I've saved this pattern. And so if I go into my patterns here, you can see that this one is a synced pattern. It's identified by this little purple icon. And here's the other pattern. If I want to, I can just find all the synced ones or the unsynced ones. So now when we go ahead back to our site and we go into that page, we'll be able to insert our pattern. Now, this is a little bit confusing, which is where it lives. This does not live under the pattern section. It lives under this section here for synced patterns. So when I go into synced patterns, I'll see all of the list of my pattern blocks. I'm getting a little bit of a notice from WordPress letting me know that reusable blocks have been renamed to synced patterns. You can go ahead and dismiss that and insert this block. And so now I have this about section on my website. So what's cool about this, if you haven't used reusable blocks before, is let's say I've inserted this post, or excuse me, this reusable block, this synced pattern on hundreds of different pages or something like that. When I now go back to the pattern editor inside of WordPress, when I make a change to this pattern, it will automatically be updated everywhere I use it. So I'll go ahead into patterns, synced patterns, we'll click to edit, and we'll say, I'm working on the new solid security launch. We'll hit save. And now when we update our post, we can see that it's already been updated to use the new content. So I don't need to do anything about that. It's all handled for me. So those are the kind of overall changes to the patterns editor. But of course, we have all of this kind of new view instead. Previously, we had templates and template parts grouped together, but template parts are now in this section as well. And we have a convenient way to add template parts. The process is pretty similar, so we're not going to dive into it. Yeah, we have this new patterns and template screen that's available in the site editor. Another thing that I want to bring attention to is navigation. So navigation is kind of a key part of our sites. We want to point people in the right direction for the content that is most important to us. And so previously, this was done through the actual site editor itself, back into like the block portion of it. But this has also been brought into the sidebar where we can make some changes. So I can go ahead and either duplicate this menu if I have multiple menus on my page, or I can go ahead and edit it. So when I edit from here, this is how I add new items. So I'm going to include a link to that iThemes training post that I made, and we'll move it over. There we go. And we'll hit save, and that'll update my navigation. If I want to, though, I can move things around here. So you can see if I want to make this iThemes training fall under the About page, I can do that. And then we'll hit save, and it'll get updated for me. If I want to add new pages, though, there isn't a way to do that yet. So this is kind of more for reorganizing from the sidebar, removing things, stuff like that. You can't actually add in new things. So we can see as I make those changes, they get reflected in the actual site editor itself. What you also may notice is this review one change here is hanging about with me. So as I go through the editor and make my changes, let's say we switch this to a different design, you'll see now I have two changes over here. So WordPress is keeping track for me the changes that I'm making. And when I'm ready, I can hit review changes, uncheck or check these as appropriate, and save to publish them to my website. The next menu here that I wanted to highlight is the Pages menu. So in initial versions of the site editor back in 5.9 and 6.0, I think even, the original concept was that you'd be able to edit your page content just kind of directly through the editor, directly through the site editor. This got kind of pulled out initially because the UX for it was a little bit confusing. It wasn't clear when were you editing the page, when were you actually editing the design, things like that. But with this new Pages menu, we now have a kind of very clear way of saying, hey, I'm now wanting to edit the pages on my site. So we have this About page over here. And as I click on to the pages on the left-hand side navigation, it updates the pages on my actual preview canvas. And if I want to, I can now go ahead and edit it. So you can see different actions that are available. I can move it to the trash, or I can click this button to edit. But as always, I can just click into the canvas to start editing. So let's say I want to move this WordPress 15 image higher up the page. I can go ahead and do that. Maybe we'll take out this pattern over here. We'll delete this block. Let's make sure we didn't do anything too disastrous there. No, I don't think so. And then we'll go ahead and hit save. And so now we've updated that page content without me needing to dive into back to the full WPM and find the page, select it, etc. This is right now just for pages. I can go ahead and add new pages if I want to, but I can't do things like write blog posts from this interface. For now, at least, WordPress thinks that the best way of doing that is through the specific WordPress interface, not through the site editor itself. So moving on, let's talk about some of the changes to the template editor. So the template editor is similar to how templates worked in classic WordPress themes. You basically get to decide a couple of different rules. For instance, here's my 404 template. Here's a blank empty template. Here's a homepage template, things like that. What we can do is create new templates on our own. So previously, if you're using a classic theme, your theme developer would either have to create that template for you, and then you would kind of get stuck with it or when they decided, or you would need to, create your child theme, look up in the template hierarchy, here's how I create my template, this is what I need to name it, etc. But we have basically that same amount of power of the template hierarchy, but we can do it in the UI. So when I create a template, WordPress now gives me this a little bit of an easier starting point to say what template I want to select. Previously, this was kind of all contained in a small little dropdown. And so I could say, maybe I want to create an item, a template for a single post. And then WordPress will prompt me if I want to create a new template for all posts or for just a specific post. So let's say I want to provide a custom template just for this I am because post. WordPress is going to create that new template for me. And another cool feature is that it's now going to give me a starting point. Previously, I would kind of just get a blank canvas, but now I get this choose a pattern interface. And so my theme right here is only bundling one, but they could bundle multiple. And I'll select that pattern, and it'll give me a convenient spot to start from. So let's say maybe for this post specifically, I want to make the image, let's say, full width. We could go ahead and do that. We could save. Now, if we go to our site, we'll find that particular post, and we'll see that it is using this full page, full width for the image, whereas the other ones are using their original template. So this is a kind of convenient way for getting into that template interface and making it a little bit easier for you if you want to be making changes. Another cool feature here that you may have seen is that when I do select my blog templates, that WordPress also brings in some settings for me. So these are some popular settings that I might want to change on my site, like how many blog posts I want to display. This is something that's notable here that confused me the first time round. As I update the number of posts here, you'll see nothing is happening in my canvas. That is the expected behavior. Once I actually review the changes and save, then WordPress will update here. So this is one of these small weird spots where the changes that you're making in the sidebar don't immediately take effect. But if you were taking a look at that, don't panic. You're like, why isn't anything happening? It's just one of these little bits that needs to be saved before we can see it in effect. Okay, so these are most of the changes that exist inside the sidebar. I do want to dive into the actual style editor a little bit more, though. So there's a really cool new feature in the global styles sidebar, which is revisions. So I can now open up this revision history, and I can go through the different changes that I've made to my site's design and click through them and say, hey, maybe I want to go back to that version that I created before. So let's say I want to revert back to how my site looked 22 days ago. I can go ahead and do that, click apply, and now we're back there. My site is going to look like it was a month ago. And so I think this can give you really great confidence in making changes, knowing that, hey, if I make some changes to my site, don't worry, you can get back to what you had before without being like, uh-oh, what are all the things that I changed? How do I revert all of them? This is a convenient way for global styles to get you back to different points. And you'd be able to see here, this is just kind of my test site, but if there are multiple users, they would have different changes by different avatars, things like that. A thing I'd love to see is like the ability to add like titles to these or things like that. That's not a feature available now. And we also don't have the ability to stage changes yet. But that is something that I know the team has been talking about, of being able to say, hey, I want to make some changes and I don't want them to affect my live site yet, but I want them to go live, let's say next Monday, when we have like a big brand changing or something like that. So this is kind of the first pass at that revisions interface. But I think it is quite the cool one, and excited to see where it grows. There's also been some changes. Duotone is available in more spaces. So if I want to change the styles of some of my blocks, I can go ahead and do that. Use Duotone for things like blog post images. Let me see if I can navigate to one and go into the styles for that block. So I can now select duotone options through here, and these are available basically in more spots that they've been available in before. Let's go ahead. Let's do something funky. Yeah, stick with that one. Okay, another pretty cool feature that we've been dancing around a little bit is in the changes to how the title area here looks. So you'll see we have this kind of new title design, and you might see this sneaky little thing here, which is Command K. This launches a feature that I think is really cool, which is the command palette. So when I hit Command K, or I can just click on this, it opens up this new type of command field. And this is both a power feature, but I think not a power feature. It lets me perform a lot of actions without needing to dive in and find where I would do them in the UI specifically. So let's say I wanted to change again my theme. I could go to styles, type that in, and it'll prompt me about different things. I can learn about styles. I can open up styles. I can open up style variations. And when I select that item, it's going to navigate me there directly. And so I can change and pick a new option there. I can even do things like creating a new page. We're going to go ahead and abandon those changes that I made to the styles. Obviously, this is my new page created from the command palette. A kind of thing right now is that you just empty this blank thing and you just kind of have to type and be like, maybe I can do navigation, which you can. And it'll bring me right over to that navigation editor. But it's not super obvious what commands are available. There is actually, I believe, on learn.wordpress.org, which you haven't checked it out, is a wonderful home for tutorials and trainings from the WordPress team. I believe there is one going up about the command palette that'll kind of like detail a bunch of them. But the team is working on making this more discoverable. And what's really cool is that this is a feature that is available for plugin developers. So right now, this is filled with commands from WordPress core, but other plugins could open up and provide new APIs, provide new commands. They could even use it on their own plugin pages, which is really cool. So this is kind of the start of a new palette that lets you navigate through WordPress quicker. Okay, so those are kind of the summary of the site editor changes, but we do have some changes to the block editor itself that I wanted to go over. So a really cool new feature is, let's create a new post, is the footnotes block. So this is a long post. I'm going to go ahead and grab some lorem ipsum content. Okie dokie. And I'm going to use the new footnotes feature. So under this more tab, I get a new option for footnote. And I can put in here whatever I want. More details available here. Link that to google.com or something like that. I can create these wherever I want in my content. Let's say we'll put one over here and we'll create another footnote. This one is much longer. And we'll go ahead and save that. And what's really cool is that this is dynamic. So as I update my content, let's say I'm saying, hey, this paragraph actually would make more sense to be the second paragraph. You can see that this little footnote indicator has been updated automatically for me. This 2 is now a 1 and the 1 is now a 2. And the items have been rearranged down here. And so WordPress is basically keeping track of everything for me. I can also move this footnote section around throughout my post. Maybe I want to put the footnotes at the top of my page for some reason. I could go ahead and do that. Right now, the design choices that you have are pretty limited, but this is something that the team is looking on for adding in new options over here. Right now, you could, for instance, like put this in a group maybe and give that group some different background colors, maybe make it stand out a little bit more, adding some padding options, changing the font size. So you can get some and be a little bit creative to kind of make your styling adjustments. But the Gutenberg team is looking at adding in more supports for customizing this footnotes block natively. The other thing to note is if you do go ahead and delete it, you can always get it back. Just open up the block consider and look for the footnotes block. And we'll go ahead and save that. Another cool new block is the summary and details block. So let's say I have an offshoot that I want to, like, maybe it's, some interesting facts about lorem ipsum. And I don't want that to, interrupt the main section of my content. So I want to kind of hide it for most initial looks. So we can do this with actually an HTML element that is just built into browsers these days, which is the details and summary element. But WordPress now has a block that lets us edit it beautifully. So I'm going to say, find out more about lorem ipsum. And inside this block here, I'll add in some additional text. And so this becomes kind of obvious when we look at it through the list view. Is what's happening here is we have this parent details block. And then within it, we have a number of different blocks. So we have our heading blocks, our paragraphs, etc. We can insert pretty much everything in here. If we wanted to maybe insert an image, we could go ahead and do that. Let's select this nice photo from New York. We can include all of that in our block. Now, when we click out of it, WordPress will close it automatically. And when we click into it, it'll open it automatically. We also get a setting here whether or not we want this section open by default. And so this means whether or not when the user views the page, whether they'll see this content right away. We'll keep this unchecked for now. We'll go ahead and publish this page. Another cool new feature here is this view post button. Previously, you'd kind of have to erase the sidebar notice that appears down on the left-hand side of my screen, but we now have a dedicated button to view the post. And so we'll take a look at it and we can see we now have this details block and we can open it and hide it when we want to expand that content. And yeah, you can see the footnotes block in action here that takes me to the different notes. So that is the details and summary block, which I think is a really helpful tool. Another change to the site editor, to the block editor, is some changes to the image panels. So the image now has this aspect ratio section. So I can select, hey, do I want to make this image a 1:1, a 4:3, etc. I can select these aspect ratios without actually cropping my image. If you want to, you can still crop it. It's still there. If you haven't used this tool before, it's pretty cool. You can go ahead and hit crop, and you can make some changes to your actual image within the block editor itself. This is a really cool feature. I think introduced in WordPress 5.3, if I remember correctly. But yeah, we now do have this aspect ratio that we can use, and we can choose to whether we want to make this cover so that the image fills the full size, or whether we want to contain the entire image within our aspect ratio. So the small thing here is this resolution field used to be called image size, but it's now called resolution. And it kind of makes a little bit more sense. So we can say, hey, we want to base this off of the full size image. And we'll go ahead and update that one. We have some more options available in button blocks. We can select things like border widths and styles that we didn't have access to before. So we can go ahead and do that if we wanted to and make those changes on our blocks as well. And we'll go ahead and update that one. And let's see, are there any other ones that I want to touch about? Yes, the spacer block. So this is kind of maybe a bit of a controversial feature. I don't know why updating failed. Interesting. Let's hope that doesn't spell doom for the last few minutes of this demo. But I'm going to insert a spacer block here. And so this kind of reminisces back to the days of like spacer.gif. But if you are maybe a web developer or web designer, you might be used to using tools like margins and paddings and things like that. But they're a little bit tricky to explain and complicated to explain to end users. So the spacer block was introduced a number of releases ago. For a long time, this has just been any arbitrary size you want. But one of the cool things about theme.json and block themes is the ability to set different presets. And we now have that option for the spacer block as well. So I can go ahead and switch this over to using a size preset. And now these are different sizes that my theme has made available. So let's say you are developing a theme for a client and you want to say, hey, I know you want to use spacers to be able to space things out, but instead of needing to remember that you should make your spacers 150 pixels or 25 pixels or 40 pixels or something like that, you can give them some pre-built convenience options that they can use. You can add pretty much as many of these as you want. You know, I'd keep it to a few as opposed to 60, but you can give them options to say, okay, I know you want to use a spacer block. Here are some different spacing options that you can use so your page content still has a nice rhythm to it. Another cool feature is the ability to upload external media directly into your post. So I'm going to drop in an image that I have from Flickr here. So we have this nice picture of Times Square. Now, when I go ahead, oh, this isn't going to show, I don't think, because it's not a new one. I might have to create a new page. Give me 1 second. Yes, I want to make sure that the pre-published checklist was showing, but let me, whoops. I don't know why updating is failing here. Interesting. I'm going to go ahead and create a new post. With our image, we'll insert from the URL. And then theoretically, yes. When I go to hit publish, WordPress has detected that I have an image in here that is not an image that is hosted on my own site. It is an external image. And so this isn't great. Some circles of the internet might call it rude. You're kind of stealing someone else's bandwidth. It's called hot linking, but it's also not great for other reasons as well. Performance can be worse. Let's say your site is on CDN, but this image is hosted from somewhere else, then they're not getting the performance benefits of your CDN. It could also change at any time. You think that you are linking to this nice image of Times Square, but it could change to something completely different and you wouldn't know about it. And so you could, of course, upload this manually to your media library, but WordPress now has this upload all button here. And you'll see that it's automatically updated this image. And we can see that it's now in the media library. If we went, for instance, to look at the actual HTML of this post, we'd be able to see that, hey, this is an image that exists on my WordPress site now. So instead of needing to go about that process manually, I'm able to do it with one click from my WordPress post editor. I will say this doesn't work everywhere. It's doing it in the browser, which means they're kind of like, depending on how the different websites work, they kind of restrict this feature from being made possible. But I found in a lot of cases, it works great. No, yeah, it's not going to get the alt text because this isn't, I haven't copied the alt text. All I'm doing is inserting an image with a URL. If I did grab something, for instance, from Openverse, so if we go into media and go into Openverse, this was introduced, I think, last release. And it's browsing through openverse.org, which is a kind of Creative Commons library. And if I enter any of these, it will pull in things like descriptions. This image didn't have an alt text, so it doesn't have any alt text there, unfortunately. But yeah, this is a separate feature for when you just have like an image URL that you've taken from somewhere. And exactly sure, you want to make sure that you're using images that are public domain. Don't get yourself in copyright trouble, which is why this Openverse integration really is very cool. You could search for, I don't know, we could search for WordPress maybe. Find some different WordPress buttons. I don't know where we're finding Airways there. I found the search is a little bit okay. New York City. We do see some, yeah, here's from I think our last demo. Where I found that image. got some beautiful pictures available for us inside of our editor. So yeah, if you've ever needed images before, we've got them now. I think it's a pretty cool feature. The last thing that I want to touch on before we can kind of get into Q&A, when we had the customizer, a really cool feature was the ability to preview different themes. This had been lacking and not possible in the WordPress block editor themes for a long time, but it has now come in WordPress 6.3. So I'm going to go, I don't know why I'm not seeing it though. I did this demo just a few weeks ago and was able to see it. Maybe the answer is no, you can't do that anymore. Let's see. Yep, I do not know where that feature went. But you used to be able to preview themes. Oh, is it just not on the details page? I guess that's a bug. So there's live preview here, but it should also appear here. Interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and hit live preview. And so now I am previewing 2022 on my site. But if I go to the front end, oh boy, everything going wrong today. Okay, I think something broke with that page quite terribly. But my homepage, and I think hopefully these other pages are still working. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with that page. But you can see I still am using 2023 here, but I have 2022. And so I can preview the different theme choices that are available, things like that. And it's not until I actually activate and save this theme that my page, or excuse me, that my website is updated. I can go ahead and navigate around, see how this theme will look. And when I'm ready and say, hey, this is the new one that I want to use, I can hit activate and save. And my theme has been updated. And there we go. So that was really cool. One of the few customizer, or one of the customizer features that we didn't bring over to the site editor immediately, but we now have. So yeah, that is kind of my overview for WordPress 6.3. So if y'all are ready, we can open it up to questions.
Absolutely. What a great set of features and only one explosion. So not
only one explosion. It was a fatal error, which is pretty interesting. It's not, sometimes, you know, we get like little glitches, but this one we kind of full on fatal error. I'm wondering what's happening there.
Yeah, very interesting. All right, so this is the time to ask your questions. If you haven't popped open the Q&A box, do that. Take a look at the questions that are asked, upvote any that you would like to see answered, and also ask your own. This is the time to do it. I'm going to actually start with a question from Carl. Can we use cadence blocks in the site editor?
Yeah, so most blocks should just be available in the site editor anyway. So yeah, you would be able to go ahead and use those.
Yeah, and so, and just to clarify this, the cadence theme, you would not have access to the site editor because it is not technically a block theme, correct?
Right, yeah. So Ben is definitely the best person to ask about this, but yes, my current understanding is that Cadence does not have a block editor theme portion of it yet. And I think Ben is looking into, and the Cadence team is looking into some kind of hybrid approach to be able to kind of like start jumping into using Cadence for full site editing as well. But the regular Cadence blocks, if you use a Cadence blocks customer, you would be able to use those pretty much anywhere you're able to use blocks in WordPress.
Yeah, so any block-based theme, and you can go to wordpress.org/themes and filter now by block-based themes. Yeah. Any block-based theme in the Cadence Blocks plugin you could use there in the site editor. But because the site editor has been it's been a moving target really for a while, and to, you know, as Cadence has been growing, they've just chosen not to make it a technically block theme yet, but that is definitely a point of discussion that's happening. Okay, good question here from Paul. Timothy, when you say speed enhancements for the block editor, does that include Cadence? What about other page builders that may not be a true block editor?
Sure. So I'd say I'll address those separately. For other full page builders, I find less and less reason these days to be using other page builders that aren't the block editor. So if I'm looking at a page builder theme these days, that's something that I want to use as opposed to something that like I'm fully writing all the HTML and PHP myself. I want to be using the block-based themes because I think that's the direction that WordPress is skating, and that's really where we want to be as folks, is like saying, hey, let's go in the direction that WordPress is moving as opposed to going in a completely different opposite direction. And so whether or not, Elementor or other WordPress page builders and themes are improving their speed, I couldn't tell you. I would say that the performance team is looking really hard at WordPress block-based themes. They're looking at all the function calls that get executed and everything to figure out what is the best way we can eke out every bit of performance. They're not looking at how do we eke out all the performance for Elementor. That being said, though, as WordPress core itself just gets faster, I'm sure it's getting faster for everyone, no matter what theme you're using. But we're seeing, the bulk of development that's happening with WordPress beyond block-based themes. So that is where you're going to get the biggest speed improvements.
Yeah. And just to clarify, I think one of the stats earlier, I read this somewhere else as well, a classic theme such as Cadence, the performance improvements, the speed improvements the performance team have implemented, that is at 18%, I think.
I believe the time to first byte for classic themes improved by 18%, and for block themes by like 25%, something like that. And so part of that is like, what's their base starting point and things like that. But I know the performance team looks really hard at both of them. And so if you're on a classic theme that is doing things like the right way, like Cadence is, you're going to continue to see those great improvements. But if you're on like a full heavy page builder, like Elementor and Avada, like these are kind of known for having performance impacts and things like that. And they're probably not going to see as much of the benefits as kind of traditional WordPress classic themes are, and definitely not the new WordPress block themes.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, another question in from Paul. I know the standard line is backup and test when installing an update like 6.3. However, you think 6.3 is going to break a lot of things?
So I would say from the tickets that have come in, there haven't been a lot of breakages. We did just run into a fatal error. It looks like it's related to the footnotes block. So if you're not using the footnotes block yet, you might be perfectly fine. But I would say I haven't seen a lot of critical things come through. But yes, I would always recommend backing up and updating. But I'll also say I have WordPress set to auto update on a lot of my sites.
Living on the edge.
It's generally pretty safe these days. Yeah.
Yeah, and also a lot of the as we've talked about, a lot of the updates in WordPress 6.3 are related to the site editor. And if you're using Cadence, for example, as your theme, a lot of these things are not going to be directly seen in your WordPress install. So safe, that's a
safe is a personal definition.
Thank you. That's what I'm after. Very good. Okay, question from Vern. In regard to the patterns that you were creating, can you import or export your own custom patterns? Can they be saved to another, to a file and imported somewhere else?
So I'll give a little plug to Cadence. Cadence has some of this functionality built in. If you want a kind of more technical way of going about it, if we go into manage all of my patterns, I get taken to this hidden WP-admin screen. You'll see that there's no page lit up in my sidebar here. The only way you can get to it is from knowing basically that it exists, or that link in the site editor these days. And there is an import from JSON thing. So I can dump in a JSON file here and WordPress will extract it. Because if you've looked at a lot of these blocks and export, if you look at what these things look like, it's this content is what a block pattern makes up. So you can like copy and paste this, for instance, into just a regular WordPress page and use a pattern kind of that way, for instance. So yeah, the WordPress has a kind of more technical version of this, but yeah, there are plugins out there, and I think Cadence also does this, that can give you the ability to like, hey, I want to have my own gallery of patterns and things like that.
Interesting. Yeah. Let's see, a couple of questions here from Sue. The first one, do the extra small settings in the type adjust on devices? Are they in pixels? Can you choose M's, REMs? What options do you have there?
Sure. So that's kind of talking about two different things. And the answer to both is yes. So was it 6.1, I think? we introduced fluid font sizes. So this is a technique using the CSS clamp function and friends that basically let you say, here's the minimum font size that I want, here's the maximum font size that I want, and then vary that based on the screen size of the device. So if the user is using a small screen, they're going to have a smaller font size. Where they're using a desktop screen, they'll have a bigger font size. And so that's something that isn't like available as a UI option, but it's something that just happens there. So I think you can kind of see that the actual font size, I believe, there is shrinking. But so yeah, themes that are using the full site editor or using theme.json can define their font sizes for things in fluid font sizes, which we'll adopt based on screen. And then also, yes, you can select units. So if you want to use rems, you can use rems.
Interesting. Yeah. Another question from Sue. There's been some unhappy chatter about changing the names of things like reusable blocks. Are you fairly confident the new name, which is synced patterns, is going to stick?
Probably. I would say in general, usability has to strike a very interesting balance, which is that we want to keep we want to keep existing users, but we also, there are people who are spinning up a WordPress site for the first time every day. And I think we want to make sure that the experience for our new users is as best as possible, because they're the ones that are at the biggest risk. That if they are completely confused the first time they open WordPress for the first time, and anything we can do to make their experience better, I think is worthwhile, even if it includes changing names. So it does make things a little bit difficult. You have to update trainings and stuff like that. But I think, the people who've been using WordPress for a long time are have seen how awesome WordPress can be, and updating and getting used to that new name isn't the biggest barrier. And I think it's worth it to make the experience moving forward nicer. If we could never make UX improvements because the old way of the UX is something that people knew about, we wouldn't get anywhere. To the degree in which I'm confident about the name sticking around, not I wouldn't be able to tell you, but I'd say likely putting this all in this pattern system is kind of how the WordPress team has been skating towards this direction for a little bit. So I would say we're probably not going to be changing it anytime soon. But, if we do a whole bunch of user tests and we determine that actually it turns out this name is way better, I think it would be worth us to change it. So.
Yeah, interesting. One of the discussions I heard along that vein was that the term synchronized patterns was more easily translatable than the word reusable block. There was a translation factor involved in that.
Translations, yeah. Localization is like a huge factor. Like there are strings that for those of us who speak English might be like, oh yeah, this is obvious, that actually turned out to be just not easily translatable. This is not a word for that. Or if there is, it's actually like a 4-part compound phrase or whatever, as opposed to something that is more neat. So yeah, language is tricky.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, question here from Sally. Reusable blocks is great if all the content across each is the same. I want to create a lot of reusable gallery blocks populated with different images or text. So if I want to make tweaks to the block structure across all of them, I can change that. Is that possible?
So it depends what you mean by make tweaks to the block structure across all of them. If you're saying that you want to make tweaks to the block structure such that once you've inserted the pattern and you've made an adjustment on one page, that it doesn't take place on the other page, so each of them can be different, yes, you can do that now. You couldn't do it previously without writing code, but you can do that now by creating a unsynced pattern. So by default, the patterns won't be kept in sync. And you can see I kind of have this example here of like this 2-up image. We could make some adjustments to say like, hey, this is, we want to change the design here. Let me, because I saw a question fly by, which was about like changing the spacing between here. Yeah, so there's this block spacing option. So like, let's say I wanted to like really shrink the block spacing in here. When I now use this pattern somewhere else, it's going to start off with this content, but any changes that I make on that page won't be affected. So unsynced patterns are great for like using a set of different content in all the different places, but you're sharing a set of layout tools. If you want to do something more dynamic than that, you could probably do this a little bit with Cadence. With Cadence's like inline content. I'm forgetting what the exact term of that is. Nathan, maybe you remember of what Cadence calls like that data field. But there are some things you can do with Cadence where you can say, use this post meta or use the post title or use things like that.
Oh,
so you
yeah.
could do some pretty advanced stuff where you create a reusable pattern. But all of the content in that reusable pattern is actually dynamic. So you could do some really crazy stuff there if you wanted to. But if you're asking like, can I make it so that built into the WordPress full site editor, I have this set of structure and these images are going to be different every time. But if I change the block spacing, for instance, in maybe let's change it for this row this time, and then I want that to get updated everywhere, we can't do that yet. WordPress does have this concept of
partially synced blocks.
Yeah, of like partially syncing things, and in particular having patterns and templates that are using content patterns. And so that's where WordPress says, okay, I want to hide for you, for instance, the sizing controls, but you can change the images and the text. And so that could also be a feature that would be expanded to say like, hey, I want to make this synced pattern here. I want to make it one, maybe have a UI option here that says this is a content pattern. And then the structure would be the same, but you would just have a very nice interface for swapping out the images.
Interesting. Yeah, that's I didn't get the concept of partially synced patterns until I started thinking about that very case where, maybe I have a gallery that I want the structure to be the same, but not the content. So that's hopefully coming. Yeah. Okay, Sherry has a good question here, especially for legacy iThemes customers who might still have some iThemes builder sites out there from long ago. Is there anything you're aware of, Timothy, that would cause a problem for iThemes builder sites if 6.3 was updated there?
No, but I'll tell you, I haven't looked at a builder site in many years, so it's possible. I would really be encouraging you to move on over to Cadence, but the classic themes have a much more consistent, I guess you could say, backward compatibility because WordPress isn't on the cutting edge of classic themes. So
yeah,
classic themes like Builder are unlikely to just spontaneously break, but I would be encouraging you strongly to move over to some block stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had some issues, for example, with a one or two old builder sites where they work, but you can't access the builder layouts anymore after a certain, and that may be a PHP 8 thing. But
yeah,
anyway,
it definitely could be a PHP issue.
At some point, yeah, Sherry, it's time to move those things over. Yeah. Let's see, a question from Vern. This is a good question in regard to the PHP notch up. If a site is still running PHP 5.4, will 6.3 just refuse to update?
Correct. I believe you won't see it even. I think we display a notice that says, hey, you're going to, if you don't know whether you're not on PHP 5.4, or in this case, it would actually be PHP 5.6 to be clear. If you don't know that you are, you probably aren't, because WordPress will be yelling at you. There's like, we have like these different notices that say like, hey, you're on an insecure version of PHP. It's yada, 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 yada. So if you're wondering, am I, you're probably not, unless you're, right where here's site health status. Like we have a notice here that says like, hey, you're on an old version of PHP. So you probably aren't, but if you are, WordPress won't let you update through the UI. And I believe we also display a message on the updater page that says, hey, you don't support the PHP version and stuff that we need, but I'm not 1,000% sure about that. It's been a minute.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, Timothy. As we're starting to wrap up here, any final thoughts about WordPress 6.3 or anything else you want to talk about?
No, I'm really excited. I love seeing all of this progress in the block editor and making these UX refinements. I think this new sidebar is huge. I'm really excited about the command palette. Right now, it's just in the post editor and the site editor, but it could definitely be taken across WordPress. I was thinking we're working on solid security releases, and I was like, we have this search field that exists that lets you search through things. That's pretty handy. I'm like, could we change this to use the command palette? And we're not going to just yet because, we're still supporting WordPress 6.2, but I'm like, that'd be a really cool thing to integrate into solid security. And I'm sure other plugin authors are looking at the same of how can we utilize this command palette feature. So if you're more of the kind of like I like to use the keyboard to navigate type of person. I think command palette is really cool. And yeah, I'm excited to see all of the content about how WordPress is going to grow in phase 3 of the block editor. I think there is a lot of really cool and ambitious things that the WordPress team is looking at, and it's a really cool place to see.
Interesting. I agree with you. The command palette is going to be the 6.3 is going to that's one of the things I think it's going to be remembered for beyond just the site editor improvements. The command palette seems to be an ideal spot to start some AI integration into WordPress. And I think we'll start to see some of those things happen maybe even this year. Pretty interesting. All right. Well, Timothy, thanks again so much for your expertise here. We always appreciate you when you're here talking about security issues or here doing the core release launch overviews. That's really, really great information. Thanks for taking time. Timothy, as you all may be aware, is very much busy working on the new Solid Security plugin and some really interesting new features and new UI, really to become the most accessible and user-friendly and powerful WordPress security plugin out there. A lot of great work happening there. So I'll drop, before we leave here, I'll drop in a link for the webinar that Timothy did not too long ago, talking about that new Solid Security plugin that's being developed. One thing I'll also mention, if you're just joining us and you're not a regular attender of iThemes training live streams, I would invite you to join us for the WordPress News Roundup, which is coming on Tuesday here at 1 p.m. Central. That's a free live stream, and it's a good overview of everything going on in the WordPress ecosystem. We do that once a month, especially for those who build and manage WordPress sites for clients. So thank you all again for being with us. Thanks again, Timothy, as well. That's going to wrap us up for today. I'm back tomorrow for members for office hours, 1 p.m. Central here on iThemes Training, where we go further together.